People often say that death is the final release, the endpoint of all pain. But they are wrong. There is something even crueler than death, being imprisoned within your own body, conscious to the very last neuron, fully sensing every shift in the air, yet unable to utter a single cry, shed a single tear, or reach out to touch the things you love as they crumble right before your eyes. I am Theodore Maxwell, or rather I was. Once, that name represented a real estate empire spanning half the country. A nod of my head could determine thousands of livelihoods. My signature could shake the financial markets. And now, I am nothing but a stone statue of flesh and bone, drawing faint breaths on a custom-made medical bed worth the price of a small villa, sustained by cold plastic tubes piercing my nose. The day I fell, ironically, was the death anniversary of Elara, the wife to whom I had devoted my entire life. The pain of losing her 10 years ago had never faded. On that very morning, as I stood before her portrait, about to tell her how much I missed her and how tired I was, a storm struck my brain. A massive stroke. That cruel blood clot didn't take my life. It stripped me of my privilege as a human being. It locked my vocal cords, severed every signal from my brain to my muscles, and paralyzed my limbs. But the most vicious punishment was that it left my mind completely intact, fully aware, forcing me to taste utter helplessness down to my marrow. Clicking. The sound of the doorknob turning pulled me back to reality. My left eye, the rare remaining part with a pathetic hint of nerve reflex, twitched slightly. It was Julian, my only son, my greatest masterpiece. Julian entered the room in an impeccably tailored, charcoal gray suit without a single crease. His face was stoic, his gaze as sharp as a surgical scalpel. He stopped at the foot of the bed, but his eyes absolutely refused to look at the wrinkled, ashen face of his fading father. His eyes were glued to the dancing numbers on the vital signs monitor, then shifted to the medical report that America's top neurologist had just obsequiously submitted. Heart rate stable, blood pressure 120/80, motor reflex none, cognitive ability vague or absent, Julian read aloud. The warm voice I was once so proud of, when he spoke on behalf of the corporation to thousands of shareholders, now sounded flat, as emotionless as a machine reading financial data. He sighed a sigh of pure annoyance, then turned to the doctor. How much is the cost to maintain this ventilator system and the in-home medical staff this month? Mr. Julian, it comes to $180,000 in total. The doctor swallowed nervously. $180,000 just to maintain the heartbeat of a biological machine beyond recovery. Julian smirked, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the leather-bound folder. From a business perspective, this is a bad debt, doctor. An unprofitable investment that continuously bleeds cash and occupies space. Julian, I am here. I can still hear you. I screamed in silence. My heart felt as if someone had reached in and squeezed it, dripping invisible drops of blood. I gathered the remaining strength of my life, trying to stretch, trying to twitch a single knuckle to let him know his father was still alive, that his father's soul was still screaming in this invisible glass cage. But it was useless. This body betrayed me. I lay there, as exposed and useless as a rotting log tossed by the roadside. Julian approached the bed. He leaned down. The scent of his expensive cologne hit my nose, suffocating and alien. His ash-gray eyes inherited from Elara, eyes that used to look up at me in adoration when he was a child, were now staring intently at me. But there was no love in them, no sorrow of a son. He looked at me as one would look at a relic of a bygone era, an eyesore of ruins blocking the path of his new empire. Keep sleeping, Mr. Theodore, he whispered, his cold voice sending shivers down my spine. Your era is over. I will keep this machine breathing, just as long as your existence doesn't affect my stock prices." He turned and walked away, his leather shoes clicking sharply and decisively against the marble floor. The door closed, locking me in a chillingly quiet space. All around me now was only the mindless beep, beep of the life monitor. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting the darkness swallow me. If I could, I would rather have died right in Eleanor's arms on her death anniversary than live to witness this tragedy. I had taught my son how to dominate the market, how to crush competitors, how never to shed a tear in the face of defeat. But I forgot to teach him how to keep a human heart. I had sculpted a monster with my own hands, and now I was being buried alive by it. The days that followed were a cycle of silent torture. I became a deserted island within my own home. The high-end medical team Julian had hired operated as smoothly as an assembly line. They injected medication, turned my body, suctioned phlegm, and changed IV fluids with absolute precision. But absolutely no one talked to me. They only talked about me. Patient in bed 1, the master room stroke case, ecstatic vitals. Those were the titles they used. To them, I was no longer the powerful Mr. Theodore Maxwell. I was a broken machine, a highly paid maintenance project. My presence in this room was so faint that once, 2 orderlies casually placed bets on a football game right above my head, occasionally patting my shoulder as if patting a sofa cushion. The humiliation choked my throat, but this treacherous body did not allow me to flinch or frown in anger. Then, on a Thursday morning, while the winter drizzle tapped rhythmically against the soundproof glass windows, she appeared. I heard Butler Harold whispering to the head nurse at the doorway, "Julian is stuck at a summit in Zurich." He didn't have time to review the files, just signed off electronically and threw it back to me. "This is the replacement from the cheap labor agency. Give her the trivial chores like wiping him down and emptying the bedpan. Don't let her touch the machinery." A moment later, the girl stepped into my narrow field of vision. She didn't wear a pristine white blouse or a premium medical uniform reeking of rubbing alcohol. She wore an ash-gray janitorial outfit, a white apron frayed at the edges, and her black hair was tied up in a bun, revealing a pale, exhausted face, yet her eyes were strikingly bright. The head nurse jerked her chin, tossing a basin of water and a roll of medical towels at her. "Wipe him down. Make it quick. The doctor is coming for an examination in 15 minutes. With that, the head nurse left the room, taking with her the suffocating aura of people who only worked for money. Only the 2 of us remained in the vast room. I half closed my eyes, bracing myself for the rough rustling, the hurried scrubbing with freezing medical alcohol that the orderlies usually did just to get it over with. But no. There was no clanging of the metal basin, no rough handling. A gentle warmth breathed into the empty space right next to my cheek. I slowly fluttered my eyelids open. The girl was leaning over, right at the edge of the bed. She wasn't looking at the heart rate monitor. She wasn't looking at the IV chart. For the first time in 18 agonizing months, someone was leaning down, looking straight into my cloudy, lifeless eyes. She hesitated for a second, then spoke, a warm, slightly trembling, but incredibly sincere voice. "Good morning, Mr. Theodore. My name is Elara. Elara Vance. Starting today, I will be in charge of bathing you and taking care of your meals." I froze. She had just called me by my name. Not the patient, not him. Elara dipped the towel into the water, carefully wrung it out, and pressed it against the back of my hand to test the temperature, exactly how a mother tests bath water for a child. Then, she gently placed the warm towel on my forehead. The soothing heat spread, piercing through the wrinkled flesh, reaching the nerves that had been numbed by despair. "I know you can hear me," Elara whispered, her hand gently tracing my temple, wiping away the cold sweat. They say you have no cognitive function left, but I don't believe it. Your eyes, they are so sad, just like my dad's eyes in his final days. My heart, what Julian called a biological machine, suddenly skipped a beat. The beep, beep of the machine above my head unexpectedly quickened, but Elara didn't panic. She smiled a sad smile, but one that contained such profound empathy, it made my soul tremble. She flipped the towel, carefully wiping down my cheeks, chin, and neck. The movements were slow, nurturing, containing an absolute respect for a fading life. For the past 18 months, I had grown used to being treated like a soulless corpse, stripped naked, flipped back and forth mercilessly. I had built a stone wall around my dignity, so as not to feel the humiliation. But now, faced with the gentleness of a stranger from the back door, that wall of pride shattered. A hot, tingling sensation rose from deep within my left eye socket, the only side of my face not completely destroyed by the stroke. My vision blurred, and then, without any neural command, a heavy tear rolled from the corner of my eye, sliding across the wrinkles on my cheek and soaking into Elara's warm towel. The first tear of the mighty billionaire Theodore Maxwell since the day he fell. Not out of physical pain, nor regret over business. It fell because I realized I had just been saved by the smallest mercy in the world. The mercy of being treated like a human being. Elara paused. She didn't use the towel to wipe the tear away immediately. Instead, she reached out her thumb, carefully and respectfully brushing it away. "I am here, Mr. Theodore," she said softly, her gaze steady. "You are not alone. Becoming a stone statue does not mean you stop yearning to speak. On the contrary, when sound is stripped away, the desire to communicate burns fiercer than ever, clawing at the walls of the mind." Elara realized this. After that morning tear, the young girl began observing me with a subtlety that no million-dollar medical device could measure. She noticed the fluctuation in my breathing when I heard the financial news. She noticed my eyes unconsciously fixating on Eleanor's portrait across the room. And most importantly, she noticed that the index finger of my left hand still occasionally twitched, as light as a feather. "Mr. Theodore," Elara sat on the edge of the bed late one afternoon, when the nurses had retreated to the hallway to gossip. She gently lifted my frail left hand, placing her palm underneath mine. "My dad used to say the human body is a miraculous fortress. Even if the front door is locked shut, there is always a hidden window. I will ask, and you answer okay. Tap once for no, twice for yes." I was stunned. It had been so long since anyone asked for my opinion on anything. They arbitrarily shoved food through a tube, arbitrarily injected medicine, arbitrarily decided when I needed to sleep. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Elara held her breath, waiting. I focused all the willpower of a man who once managed tens of thousands of employees. My mind transmitted an urgent command, bypassing the necrotic brain regions, running down my left arm. It took almost 10 seconds, but finally, my index finger moved. Tap, tap. 2 faint taps echoed on Elara's palm, but in my soul, they resonated like thunder. I had spoken. I still existed. Elara's eyes welled up with tears, and she beamed, "Wonderful. You did so well, so. Is this blanket too warm?" Tap, "No. Would you like me to open the curtains so you can see the rose garden?" Tap, tap, "Yes." For that entire week, amidst the suffocating glass cave of my vegetative existence, I found my soul again through those finger taps. Elara became the sole bridge between my silent realm and the outside world. But happiness is often fragile, especially when it lies within Julian's control. On a Sunday morning, Julian returned from a business trip. Unlike usual, he was accompanied not only by the familiar doctor, but also by a medical interior design team and several cleaners. Take down all the fabric curtains, replace them with antibacterial partitions, Julian ordered coldly, his fingers gliding quickly over his tablet. Clear out that wooden cabinet. The bookshelf too. Dust on souvenirs can cause respiratory infections. This room needs to meet ICU standards, not act as a museum. My heart constricted. The wooden cabinet and the bookshelf. That was where all of Eleanor's keepsakes were stored. I glared at the strange workers who were roughly gathering my wife's worn novels and tossing them into massive black trash bags, and then a worker approached the opposite wall. He reached out, preparing to take down Eleanor's portrait. Next to it was the blue silk scarf, the one she had worn on our first anniversary, the only thing that still faintly carried her familiar scent of lavender. "No, leave her. Don't touch her," I screamed in my dry throat. My left hand slammed against the mattress in sheer desperation. Tab, tab, tab. I tapped continuously, tapping until my fingertips bled. The heart rate on the monitor spiked to an alarming level. The shrill beep, beep, echoing piercingly. The patient is suffering from neurological agitation. Mr. Julian. The doctor frowned. Inject a sedative, Julian replied, without even bothering to look up at me. He's just having involuntary spasms. Clear out that junk, hurry up. A cold needle pierced my arm. Freezing chemicals pumped straight into my veins, beginning to drag down my eyelids and suffocate my consciousness. This pain was sharper than any blade. The son my wife had exhausted herself to birth, had sung lullabies to every night, was now coldly trashing every trace of her into garbage bags like rags. He wasn't just stripping away my human rights. He was erasing the only past that anchored me to this world. As my consciousness was about to drown in the mud of the sedative, through my narrow, tear-filled eyes, I suddenly saw a gray silhouette dart by. It was Elara. She rushed over and snatched the black trash bag from the cleaner's hand, using the excuse, "Let me take this out." She slipped into the blind spot behind the door, moving incredibly fast, with a recklessness that could get her fired and thrown out immediately. Elara secretly pulled the small framed photo and the blue silk scarf out of the plastic bag, hastily hiding them inside her apron. A moment later, when the room had been completely stripped bare and turned into a cold, sterile glass box, Elara tiptoed closer to my bed. She carefully lifted my pillow, tucking the silk scarf and the photo beneath the soft mattress, right next to where my heart lay. She leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. "She is still here, Mr. Theodore," Elara whispered, her voice choking up. "You didn't lose her. I won't let anyone take that part of your life away." The sedative dragged me into a thick black sleep, but for the first time, within my crippled chest, a fragile seed of hope began to sprout. A stranger had risked her livelihood to scavenge my soul back from the cruel trash heap of my own son. Ever since the room was stripped bare, the only thing keeping me from going insane was the faint scent of lavender wafting from under the mattress, where Elara had hidden Eleanor's keepsakes. Every night, when darkness surrounded me, I tried to stretch my shoulder, pressing my cheek against the bed, imagining that I was leaning on my wife's shoulder. But then, on a Tuesday afternoon, the storm struck again, tearing apart my last shred of false peace. Julian entered the room. This time, he wasn't with a doctor or an orderly. Walking beside him was a woman, Victoria Hayes. My heart tightened, the heartbeat on the screen jerking up. I knew this woman. She was the chief legal officer of the corporation, and also Julian's girlfriend. If Julian was an emotionless money-making machine, Victoria was the operating system of that machine, calculating, ruthless, and entirely devoid of mercy. She walked into my hospital room on stiletto heels, the sound clicking against the marble floor as sharp as knife strikes. The pungent smell of expensive perfume hit my nose, overpowering the delicate scent of lavender. They weren't here for a sick visit. They brought a portable folding table, placed it right at the foot of my bed, and began laying out stacks of legal documents. "What is the medical team's assessment of his condition?" Victoria spoke up, jerking her chin toward me. She didn't even bother to use a respectful pronoun. "Partial brain death, full body paralysis, indefinite vegetative state," Julian answered coldly, loosening his tie as he pulled up a chair. "Good," Victoria smirked, pulling a thick contract from her leather briefcase and placing a gold-plated fountain pen on top. "Then we don't have to worry about legal resistance. This is the transfer of full power of attorney over assets. This villa is eating up too much property tax and maintenance costs. The investment group from Dubai has agreed to buy this land to level it and build a luxury resort. Their offer is 30% above market value. Level it, this villa." My eardrums rang, as if thousands of needles were piercing my brain. This wasn't some lifeless piece of real estate. This was the life's work of Elara and me. Every brick, every window arch, every rosebush in that garden was planted and designed by my wife's own hands. She took her last breath in this very house. We had vowed to keep this place for our grandchildren, and now the son I had painstakingly raised was planning to sell it out for a 30% profit margin. "Sign here, Julian." Victoria pointed to the bottom corner of the page. "You are already the legal guardian. The moment this signature takes effect, the bulldozers will be here by the end of next month. We will move him to a special care facility in the suburbs. Out of sight, out of mind." "No, Julian. You can't do this, please." I channeled every ounce of strength from my dying life into my left arm. I had to stop him. I had to let him know I did not consent. Tap, tap, tap. My index finger tapped frantically against the leather-upholstered bed frame. My heart rate skyrocketed, the monitor emitting warning beeps. I tapped so hard that my knuckles turned red, my nails feeling as if they would peel off. "Julian, look at your father. Hear me tapping, son." Julian picked up the fountain pen. Hearing the blaring heart monitor and the faint, frantic clicking, he paused slightly. His ash-gray eyes looked up at me. In that moment, I thought he had heard me. I thought the 7-year-old boy from years ago, the child who once hugged my legs, crying and begging me not to cut down the old tree in the garden, because he feared the birds would lose their nest, was looking at me. I waited for a hesitation. But right then, the phone in Julian's suit pocket vibrated violently. He rolled his eyes at the screen, then clicked his tongue and sighed. "The shareholders again. So annoying." "Then sign it quickly." Victoria smiled a razor-sharp smile, pressing the pen into Julian's hand. "Don't pay attention to those meaningless mechanical reflexes. Just sign it, Julian. He doesn't have the consciousness to grieve anyway." Doesn't have the consciousness to grieve. The words of my own flesh and blood pierced my chest like a rusted sword, twisting deep into my bleeding heart. Julian slashed the pen across the paper, signing his name in one long stroke, quick, cold. The death sentence for my soul, for Elara's past, had been issued. He stood up, answered the phone, and turned on his heel to walk out the door without looking back at me even once. My left finger slid numbly off the bed frame, falling limp onto the mattress helpless. I had lost everything. My fortune, my voice, my dignity, and now, even the last reason to believe I ever had a family. If tears could flow as blood, then at this moment, my pristine white medical bed would have long been dyed deep crimson. Julian left, taking the last remnants of my hope out the oak door. But Victoria didn't follow immediately. She lingered, leisurely gathering the documents on the folding table. The rustling of paper mixed with the triumphant clicking of her stilettos on the floor created a suffocating, agonizing noise. Only when Julian's footsteps had completely faded at the end of the hallway and the on-duty nurse had returned to the break room did Victoria stop her hands. She turned around, staring intently at me, the corners of her eyes hitched up in smug satisfaction. The facade of a professional corporate lawyer and an understanding girlfriend from moments ago was completely stripped away. Standing before my hospital bed now was a venomous snake, flicking its tongue, savoring a prey incapable of resistance. Victoria slowly walked toward the window. She reached out and grabbed the curtain cord. Swish. The blackout curtains were violently yanked open. The harsh, blazing afternoon sun of summer pierced through the glass, shining directly onto my face. With no eyelids to shut completely, no neck muscles to turn away, my retinas felt as if they were being burned by 1,000 needles. My eyes ached excruciatingly, but I could only lie there, numbly enduring the visual torture. Victoria laughed brightly. She stepped closer to the bed, leaning low, her meticulously made-up face magnified in my blurry vision. The pungent smell of her perfume overpowered the entire room. "Look at that smile of defeat, the great Mr. Theodore," as she whispered, her voice as slippery as chilled grease. "Did you think I didn't know? Do you think I'm like those stupid doctors, believing you're just a brain-dead log?" My heart lurched. The monitor spiked slightly, emitting hurried beeps. Victoria extended a finger with a bright red painted nail, tracing it down from my forehead to my cheek, cold and full of contempt. "I know you're still awake. I saw how your fingers twitched when I mentioned selling this house. It hurts, doesn't it? It hurts to see your empire taken over by me, while the son you were most proud of lies firmly in the palm of my hand." She leaned her mouth close to my ear, her breath hissing through her teeth. "Let me tell you a secret, Mr. Billionaire. Selling this dilapidated villa is only the first step. Next week, you will be moved to a special care facility in the suburbs. Oh, the name sounds so beautiful. In reality, it's a warehouse for the elderly gasping for their last breath. There will be no nurses on duty 24/7. No precise climate control, no music, nothing." She stepped back a little to look straight into the despair churning in my eyes, then pulled a thin sheet of paper from her folder. "And this," she waved the paper in front of my face, "is a DNR order. Do not resuscitate. Julian has authorized me to handle medical procedures. If one night at the nursing home, your breathing tube accidentally comes loose, or your heart suddenly stops beating, no one will bring a defibrillator to save you. They will just stand there and watch you stop breathing, completely legally." The fury inside me erupted like a volcano. If I could stand up for just 1 second, I would use these hands to crush that cunning bitch's throat. I used to be the man who swallowed giant corporations, who made the old foxes of the business world tremble and beg. Yet now, I was having my life stripped away by a pragmatic woman right on my own bed. The absolute resentment, combined with the blazing sun burning my eyes, forced a hot tear from my left eye socket. It welled up, rolling down my twitching cheek. Victoria saw that tear. Instead of pity, her eyes gleamed with extreme satisfaction. She slowly pulled a rough tissue from the table, scrubbing it violently against my cheek to wipe away that tear of resentment. The scrubbing was so forceful that my skin turned red and burned. Tusk, Victoria smirked, tossing the crumpled tissue into the trash. "Tears are just the mechanical neural reflexes of a vegetable ripe, Mr. Billionaire. No one cares." Saying that, she stood up straight, smoothing the wrinkles on her designer dress. "Enjoy your last days in your glass cage. The sunshine today is beautiful." Victoria turned on her heel, the sound of her shoes striking the floor growing distant before disappearing behind the door. Left alone under the harsh sunlight, I half closed my eyes. This paralyzed chest was imprisoning a soul roaring in blood. I was not afraid of death. I had prepared for death since the day Elara left. But I was terrified of dying in this humiliation, terrified of handing my legacy and my foolish son over to a demon. Elara. I called my wife's name in the deepest depths of my consciousness. I'm sorry. I couldn't protect our home. I couldn't protect our son. That night was the longest night of my life. The darkness condensed into blocks of lead weighing heavily on my chest. I lay waiting for a heart attack, a cessation of breathing, or any release from the Grim Reaper. But death rejected me, giving way to a new day, crashing in with cruel reality. The next morning, Elara walked into the room. As soon as she saw me, the soft smile that usually graced her lips instantly vanished. She rushed to the bedside. Elara's eyes locked onto my left cheek, where the red mark from Victoria's violent scrubbing yesterday still lingered. She reached out and gently stroked the inflamed skin, her brows furrowed in distress. "Who did this?" Elara whispered, her voice hoarse from suppressed anger. Naturally, I couldn't answer, she sighed, a sigh laden with the helplessness of someone from the lower class, forced to witness the crimes of the upper class, without being able to intervene. Elara turned around, carefully pulling the curtains closed, blocking the harsh sunbeams trying to pierce my retinas. The space in the room softened, cool and quiet. Then she turned back to the bed, sliding her hand under the mattress. When her hand emerged, Elara's blue silk scarf appeared. Elara gently draped it over my chest, smoothing out every crease. The familiar scent of lavender immediately flooded my lungs, somewhat soothing the resentment burning in my mind. Yesterday, when cleaning out the storage room to throw things away, on Mr. Julian's orders, I found an old vinyl record, Elara said as she pulled a frayed smartphone from her apron pocket. I couldn't keep the record, but I recorded it. I thought, maybe you would like to hear it. She pressed play. From the crackling speaker of the old phone, a melody rang out. My heart suddenly skipped a beat. It was a classical waltz, the very song Elara and I had danced to on our 30th wedding anniversary. The scratchy sound of the record player echoing in this cold, sterile glass cage felt like a miracle, a crack through space taking me back to the past. Elara didn't stop there. She smiled softly, leaning down to lift my frail left hand. My dad used to say, music is the only language that doesn't need vocal cords, she whispered. With a gentleness that made one want to cry, Elara held my paralyzed fingers, beginning to softly sway my arm to the slow rhythm of the waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Though my body couldn't move on its own in my mind, I was wearing a sharp black tuxedo, holding Elara's waist under the dazzling chandelier of this very villa. My wife was laughing. Her ash-gray eyes were sparkling with happiness. My heart rate on the monitor began to stabilize, the beep-beep sounds becoming more rhythmic and soothing than ever before. The dark despair was pushed back by a glimmering ray of human warmth. Right at that moment, out of the corner of my right eye, I saw a dark figure appear at the doorway. The ajar door was pushed open slightly. It was Julian. He wore a white dress shirt, his tie undone, holding the folder bearing the logo of the suburban nursing home, the one Victoria had prepared yesterday. He had come to throw me out of this house, but the footsteps of the cold-blooded billionaire suddenly halted in midair. Julian stood rooted to the spot at the threshold. His ash-gray eyes widened, glued to the scene before him. A poor maid guiding the paralyzed hand of his father in a dance. His late mother's blue silk scarf draped over my chest, and the old waltz melody enveloping the room. I waited for a fit of rage. I waited for Julian to storm in, snatch the phone, fire Elara, and call security to drag me away. But no. The hand gripping Julian's folder slowly loosened. His white knuckles trembled. For the first time since Elara passed away, I saw the emotionless mask on my son's face crack. His gaze wavered violently, a tearing struggle between the ruthless authority he had draped over himself and the fragile humanity he had buried long ago. He was remembering. He was definitely remembering. He remembered sitting on the stairs, watching his parents dance to this exact melody. Julian stood entirely still, staring blankly at us for 2 full minutes. Then suddenly, he took a step back, turned, and left without uttering a single word. His footsteps down the hallway were no longer sharp and decisive as usual, but heavy and hesitant. The transfer papers were not presented that morning. A fragile ray of light tore through my pitch-black sky. The sun I had molded hadn't been completely swallowed by demons yet. There was still a fragment of a human soul gasping inside him, and Elara, the fragile girl in the faded apron, had unintentionally awakened it. Julian's hesitation that morning bought me an invaluable privilege: time. For the next 3 days, the transfer order was frozen. Julian used the excuse of needing to review media risks to postpone moving me to the suburban nursing home. For the first time, I saw a crack in the perfect shell of the emotionless machine I called my son. But not Victoria Hayes. A corporate takeover lawyer never accepts a prey slipping from her grasp just because of a little sentimental emotion. As sharp as a female wolf, scenting danger in her territory, Victoria immediately bared her fangs at the one blocking her path: Elara. One afternoon, while Julian was in a board meeting downtown, the door to my hospital room was pushed wide open. Victoria stormed in, her stiletto heels tapping a deadly rhythm. She marched straight to the bed, where Elara was gently feeding me spoonfuls of warm water to moisten my cracked lips. Smack! Victoria violently slammed a thick stack of investigative files onto the mattress, right next to my arm. The sharp noise made Elara jump. The spoon in her hand trembled, spilling a few drops of water onto the pristine white sheets. "How long are you planning to play this saving angel act, Miss Vance?" Victoria crossed her arms, her voice smooth but as sharp as a razor blade. Elara took a step back, her eyes bewildered. "Ms. Hayes, I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm just doing my caregiving job." "Doing your caregiving job? By sneaking around keeping items ordered to be thrown away. By playing dance music to psychologically manipulate my boyfriend." Victoria smirked, her red-painted fingers flipping open the files on the bed. "Do you think the Maxwell Corporation's legal department is so useless they wouldn't investigate the background of a stranger brought into the house?" My heart pounded a beat faster. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the bold letters on the paper: credit report and medical debt. "Your father died 6 months ago from a stroke, and he left his good little daughter a massive medical debt of $250,000 because he had no insurance." Victoria gritted out every word, casting a contemptuous look at Elara from head to toe. A medical student forced to drop out, working under-the-table maid jobs to dodge debt. And then, oh my, a godsend opportunity. You step into the mansion of the paralyzed billionaire Theodore Maxwell, a filthy rich old man abandoned by his family. A perfect target for a gold digger, right? No, that's not it. Elara shook her head violently, her eyes turning red. "I needed the salary, yes, but I never intended to take advantage of him. My dad died in isolation because we were poor. When I saw Mr. Theodore, abandoned by his own family, I just wanted him to be treated like a human being." "Shut your mouth," Victoria hissed, slamming her hand on the table. "A human being? Look at him. Does he look anything like a human being to you? He is just a rotting pile of meat, counting down the days to the incinerator." Do you think if you squeeze out a few tears and play a few old songs, he'll secretly rewrite his will and leave you a few $1,000,000? Or are you planning to use these stupid, intimate gestures to blackmail Julian? Damn it, shut up. You have no right to insult her. The blood in my veins boiled. The fury exploded in my mind like a bomb. The sixth great pain of my life, a pain even more bitter than death, lying completely paralyzed, eyes wide open, witnessing my only savior being humiliated, her dignity wrongfully trampled on, without being able to utter a single word to protect her. I wanted to roar. I wanted to swing my arm and tear those files to shreds. I wanted to punch Victoria's cunning face and tell her that the soul of this poor girl was tens of thousands of times nobler than her filthy, prestigious pedigree. But this glass cage of a body remained inert. My left fingers tapped frantically against the mattress. Tap, tap, tap. A desperate, pathetic resistance. Elara cried. Tears streamed down her thin face, but she didn't run away. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with pity. Despite being utterly humiliated, she only worried about my skyrocketing heart rate on the monitor. Please leave the room. Elara bit her lip, her voice shaking but resolute. Mr. Theodore's heart rate is rising to dangerous levels. You are killing him. The one killing him is you. Victoria stepped forward, getting right in Elara's face, delivering a chilling threat. I have already prepared a lawsuit. The charge, elder abuse and manipulation. If you don't pack your bags and get the hell out of this house right now, I swear I will throw you in prison, and your father's debt will follow you to your grave. Victoria turned on her heel and walked out the door, leaving Elara standing stunned in the middle of the room, her thin shoulders trembling violently from fear and injustice. I lay there, tears streaming down my face, hating myself to the bone. I had once protected tens of thousands of employees in my empire, but now I couldn't even shelter a small girl who had wiped my tears. That evening, Julian returned. Unlike his hesitant demeanor a few days prior, his footsteps this time were hurried and heavy. As soon as he entered the room, Victoria immediately played the role of the devoted lawyer, her face full of gravity and anxiety. You have to deal with this immediately, Julian. Victoria handed him the investigative files on Elara. She is not a normal maid. She is a medical school dropout, carrying a $250,000 debt on her back. She has been unilaterally performing unlicensed medical acts on your father. Julian frowned, skimming through the words on the pages. His eyes stopped at the massive debt figure of Elara's family. Julian, think about it. Victoria lowered her voice, pouring venom into my son's ear. If he chokes on water, or suffers a heart attack while she is dancing, or doing those cheap, sentimental tricks, who takes responsibility? A multi-million-dollar medical negligence lawsuit. A fatal PR blow right before the corporate merger. Are you willing to trade your career for a gold-digging scammer? I glared at Julian. No, Julian, think son. Don't listen to her. She is the only one who treats me like a human being. Julian looked up, glancing toward the corner of the room where Elara stood huddled, her hands clasped tightly together, trembling. I saw his Adam's apple bob. For a fraction of a second, I hoped the memory of the waltz the other day would hold him back. I hoped the human part of him would speak up to protect what was right. But power and the fear of financial risk triumphed. The emotionless machine in Julian rebooted, crushing his fading humanity. Harold, Julian coldly called the butler standing outside the door. Call security up here. Escort Miss Vance out of the mansion immediately. Revoke all her access privileges. And prepare a specialized ambulance. Transfer Mr. Theodore straight to the suburban facility tomorrow morning. Yes, sir. The verdict was read. There was no trial for Elara. No voice for me. Everything was decided by the command of a manipulated billionaire. Two large security guards in black suits entered the room. They showed no mercy, grabbing Elara's thin arms and dragging her toward the door. "Let go of me. I can walk myself." Elara struggled in vain. She turned her head back, her desperate eyes looking toward my medical bed. In this country, the poor never have a chance to win against the lawyers of the ultra-rich. She knew she couldn't fight them, just as I knew I couldn't protect her. "Clear out the garbage she brought in here." Victoria jerked her chin, ordering the orderly, her triumphant gaze sweeping over the blue silk scarf, still lying loosely on my chest. An orderly stepped forward, roughly snatching Eleanor's scarf and tossing it into the trash, simultaneously tossing in the old phone containing our waltz. Everything happened too fast. The room returned to its inherent cold, sterile, and ruthless state. When she was dragged to the threshold, Elara used all her remaining strength to wrench one arm free from the guard's grip. She didn't beg Julian, nor did she curse Victoria. She just looked straight into my cloudy, tear-filled eyes and cried out, choking on her sobs, "I'm sorry, Mr. Theodore. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. You have to live. You must not give up." The oak door slammed shut. That sharp sound completely severed my final lifeline. They were all gone. The room sank into silence, leaving only the ventilator hissing steadily. I lay there exposed, hollow. My chest felt as if it had been cleaved in two, bitten by thousands of ants. This pain surpassed all limits of human endurance. I had lost my beloved wife. I had lost my son to a demon, and now I had lost the last person in this world who saw me as a living human being. They didn't just chase Elara away. They had pulled the plug on my soul. My left hand went limp. I didn't want to tap anymore. I didn't want to fight anymore. The thick darkness from the four sterile walls began to crawl up, tightening around my throat. I closed my eyes, hoping the heart rate on that monitor would quickly flatline into a cruel, horizontal line so I could end this tragedy forever. Darkness extended its cold tentacles, wrapping tightly around my mind. The heart rate on the screen began to slow. Beep, beep, beep. The doctors call this the state of biological surrender. When the will to survive is broken, the body automatically flips the switches to welcome death. But right at that razor-thin boundary between life and the void, Elara's desperate scream echoed in my head. "You have to live. You must not give up." Simultaneously, the image of Eleanor's blue silk scarf being callously thrown into the trash like a rag flashed, burning fiercely in my retinas. My wife, my legacy. The son I loved was being led by the nose by a cunning woman. And that poor, kind-hearted girl was enduring bitter humiliation just because she offered me a shred of human kindness. No. A flash of lightning ignited in the dark regions of my brain. No, I cannot die like this. I am Theodore Maxwell. I built this empire from the ashes. I protected this family through the most brutal crises. I will not allow these parasites to decide my fate and trample on the people I protect. A primal fury erupted, transforming into a massive surge of high voltage striking straight into my central nervous system. The blood vessels on both sides of my temples throbbed wildly. Doctors had concluded my neural pathways were dead, but they didn't know that, when grief and fury surpass the limits of the physical body, a human being can do things that force medicine to bow its head. My left hand, the hand that could only tap a few weak beats, began to convulse violently. The wrinkles flexed, blue veins bulging under the ashen skin. I channeled all my vitality, all the rest of my life into that arm. My heart beat wildly in my chest, threatening to shatter my ribcage. The heart monitor shrieked with deafening warning alarms. And then, with a swing carrying the strength of the afterlife, my left arm swept powerfully to the side. Crash! The metal medication tray, the glass of water, and the crystal IV bottle placed on the bedside table were violently hurled onto the marble floor. The shattering, ear-splitting sound echoed throughout the room, puncturing the deathly atmosphere. The footsteps in the hallway halted. The hospital room door that had just been closed was instantly thrown wide open. Julian, Victoria, the two security guards, and Elara, who was pinned between them, stared blankly at the hospital bed. The scene before them froze all the blood in their veins. The glass cage was shattered. The stone statue had awakened. I was no longer lying flat on the mattress. My neck muscles bulged so much that every fiber of flesh was visible, forcing my upper body to arch up from the bed. My cloudy gray eyes were now shot with red blood vessels, burning with the fire of a cornered emperor. Victoria turned pale. She took a step back, her bright red painted lips trembling violently, stammering WH. "What is this, nurse? Sedatives?" I glared directly at her. My vocal cords, which had been paralyzed for 18 months, were now dry and rigid like a rusted steel pipe. I forced air up from the bottom of my lungs, tearing the mucosal lining of my throat, biting my bleeding lips to form the sound. It hurt like swallowing broken glass, but I didn't care. I shakily raised my left arm, my skeletal index finger pointing straight at Victoria Hayes's face. The roar from death's door erupted raspy, shattered, yet carrying absolute authority. "Get out!" The two bloody words slammed into the marble walls, striking the eardrums of everyone present. Victoria stumbled back 3 more steps, tripping over her own heels and collapsing onto the floor. The security guards unconsciously loosened their grips, stepping back in sheer terror. No medical device, no power of attorney contract could cover up the truth in this moment. Theodore Maxwell was not dead, and he was enraged. The throat-tearing roar exhausted me, my chest heaving violently. But I wasn't finished. I turned my head, my tear-filled eyes, sharp as swords, shifting toward the girl standing stunned by the doorway. The hand pointing at Victoria slowly changed direction, struggling to reach toward Elara. I looked at the girl in the gray apron, who had cried herself dry for me, trying to muster the last breath of my fading life, to utter a word to protect my savior's dignity. "Mind. She is my person. No one has the right to chase her away." My hand dropped onto the bed. My body lost all its strength, collapsing back onto the pillows. The heart rate monitor gradually cooled down, but the heavy silence enveloping the room at that moment was thicker than dynamite. By the door, Julian dropped the authorization folder onto the floor. Papers scattered everywhere. His ash-gray eyes were wide open, staring at me as if he had just seen a god descend to earth. The fog of power, of cold profit margins, of despicable manipulation, was completely torn apart by my roar. The emotionless machine in Julian shattered. Faced with the fierce survival instinct of his paralyzed father, all the calculations of the elite suddenly became laughable and trashy. He turned to look at Victoria. The glamorous facade of the powerful lawyer vanished. Now, she was just a pathetic wretch crawling on the floor, her panicked eyes darting around looking for an escape. Then, Julian looked at Elara, the thin girl whose arms were bruised by the guards, tears streaming down her face, yet her eyes burning with the light of salvation. Epiphany struck my son late, but fiercely. Julian straightened his back. The cold aura of a CEO returned, but this time not to serve greed, but to protect his family. He looked at the two guards standing frozen, then coldly jerked his chin toward Victoria. "You heard the boss's orders. Get her out right now." Victoria Hayes did not leave quietly. As she was grabbed by the armpits by the two guards and dragged out of the room, she struggled madly, screaming and throwing out sharp threats about breach of contract lawsuits, about the PR scandals that would rain down on the Maxwell Corporation. But Julian didn't even blink. My son stood there, his hands in his pockets, coldly watching the woman who had once manipulated his mind being thrown out the door. Her figure faded at the end of the hallway, taking with her all the suffocation and cruelty of despicable schemes. The room sank into silence. Julian slowly turned around. He didn't walk toward me right away, but headed straight for the trash can in the corner of the room. The billionaire in the expensive designer suit bent down, personally picking up Elara's blue silk scarf and the old phone. He carefully brushed off the invisible dust, then slowly walked over to the bed. Julian placed the phone on the table, then draped the silk scarf back over my exhausted, heaving chest. His large hand engulfed my crippled left hand. For the first 18 months, this was the first time I felt warmth from my own flesh and blood. "I'm sorry, Dad." Julian buried his head against the edge of the bed, his voice breaking. His shoulders shook. The 7-year-old child from years ago had truly returned. On the other side, Elara still stood silently, reaching up to wipe away the tears rolling down her cheeks. Julian looked up at her, his eyes no longer holding the arrogance of a superior, but filled with profound gratitude. "From now on, this mansion is your home, Elara," Julian said, his voice deep and resolute. "You don't have to be a maid for anyone anymore. Stay here, be the primary caregiver for my father, with the highest authority. No doctor or nurse has the right to touch him without your consent." And Julian kept his promise. In the days that followed, the Maxwell villa changed completely. The cold, sterile shell was broken. The dark curtains were pulled up, giving way to the sweet morning sunlight. Julian fired the entire old, emotionless medical team, replacing them with people hand-picked by Elara. The $250,000 medical debt of Elara's family was wiped clean by Julian with a single click, not as an act of pity, but as a token of gratitude. But the biggest, most miraculous change came from my son himself. Julian canceled a series of European business trips. He began turning off his cell phone every time he entered my room. The CEO, who once terrified Wall Street now, sat patiently for hours by the edge of my bed, relearning how to spell every signal of life. "The soup is a bit bland today, isn't it, Dad?" Julian held the porcelain bowl in his hands, gently scooping a spoonful and blowing on it. He stopped, didn't feed it to me immediately like a machine, but looked up at me waiting. I focused my consciousness on my left arm. Tap, tap. "That's right." Julian laughed, a laugh so relieved and warm, I knew it. "I'll tell the chef to add a little pepper later. Let me try feeding you. I'm not very used to it yet. If it's too hot, just tap once." The boy clumsily brought the spoonful of soup to the corner of my mouth, carefully using a handkerchief to wipe away a drop of broth that fell onto my chin. The action, though awkward and clumsy, made my heart swell with happiness. I no longer felt like a burden, a bad debt. I was a father being cared for by his son. The harsh winter gave way to the caressing breezes of spring. On a brilliant April afternoon, I was no longer lying within four walls. Elara had suggested taking me outside. She placed me in a specialized medical wheelchair, carefully draped the blue silk scarf around my neck, and pushed the chair out onto the oak porch facing the rose garden, where the first buds, planted by Elara's own hands, were beginning to bloom. The wind blew softly through the leaves, carrying the scent of damp earth and life. Elara sat on the porch steps, smiling as she hummed the melody of the waltz from years ago. Beside me, Julian was sitting in a lounge chair, one leg crossed over his knee, leisurely turning the pages of a book. Occasionally, he would look up, adjust the blanket on my lap, or gently touch my shoulder to ensure I was still comfortable. There were no urgent phone calls, no suffocating financial reports, only peace. I half-closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. From deep within this paralyzed body, my soul had been completely healed. Having spent a lifetime hustling in the business world, I had once arrogantly believed that power and money were the strongest shields that could protect a person from any tragedy. But on the day I fell, money only bought cold injections, and power almost handed my life over to demons. It wasn't until I was stripped of my voice and my legs that I realized a brutal but priceless truth. Money can build a massive empire, but only human kindness, empathy, and compassion have the power to keep a soul from falling into the abyss. I lightly tapped my left finger against the wheelchair armrest. Tap, tap. Julian looked up from his book, smiling at me. Elara turned around too, her clear eyes sparkling, reflecting the sunlight. No one needed to say another word, for in that silent moment, the language of love resonated louder and stronger than any sound in this world.